Assalamu alaikum, class. I would like to welcome you all to the first week of Physics, God is Force and Power. And this week we'll be going over the lesson of just that, God is Force and Power. And I've prepared a PowerPoint for you all, inshallah, to hopefully help you all better understand some of these concepts that we're going to go over. So we're going to jump right into it. And so beginning off, this is really going to be the basis for this week's lesson. I'm going to refer back to this a lot, but it's a quote from the Message to the Black Man, where the messenger writes, where the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad writes, "Knowledge is the result of learning and is a force or energy that makes its bearer accomplish or overcome obstacles, barriers, and resistance. In fact, God means possessor of power and force. The education my people need is that knowledge, the attribute of the attribute of God, which creates power to accomplish and make progress in the good things or the righteous things." And so, in this quote, he goes over the terms that's really going to be the the focus of our physics lesson that we're going to learn are these terms, force and power. And in here, he states really in a mathematical way that God means possessor of power and force. And he says that knowledge is a force that makes its bearer accomplish and overcomes obstacles, barriers, and resistance. And he says that that knowledge, or that attribute of God, which is the knowledge of God, is what makes the possessor of that knowledge or that power God. So what he's saying is that, when you possess the knowledge of God, you possess the power, the force and power of God also. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off by defining our terms that we have, that the messenger set our lesson up, is these terms. So the first term we have is force. And so in physics, because this is a physics lesson, so all of our terms and definitions that we're going to go over are going to be very precise, because in physics we have a very, very precise language that we use when we describe these physical things. So force is defined as a force is a push or pull upon an object resulting from the object's interaction with another object. And so just as the definition states, it simply is that a force is a push or a pull. But it's important to note is that push or a pull has to be the result of objects' interaction with each other. So forces just don't come out of anywhere or nowhere, but they're actually the result of an interaction. And so the mathematical equation for force is equal to mass times acceleration. Next, we have power. And power is the rate at which work is done. Sometimes the work is done very quickly, and other times the work is done rather slowly. And so, again, to mention that power is the rate at which work is done. It's how fast work is done. And so, like it says, it could be done faster or slower. So meaning that the faster work is done, the more power, and the slower work is done, the less power. Okay? And the equation for power is equal to work divided by time. And it's important to note that it says the rate at which work is done, but it doesn't say the rate at which force is exerted, because a lot of times we can get that misconception that power, we're talking about how much force, but we're actually talking about how much work. And that's really important, and it goes right into our next definition. And so here we're going to define work, because in order to understand power, we have to understand work. So it says, when a force acts upon an object to cause a displacement of the object, it is said that work was done upon the object. There are three ingredients to work, which is really important, which are force, displacement, and cause. So in order for a force to qualify as having done work on an object, there must be a displacement, and the force must cause the displacement, which is saying that in order for or worked, a force to qualify as having done work, the force itself has to cause the displacement of that object or cause the object to move. And so, in physics, displacement is a very definite term, but it simply means to move an object a distance away from its original position. So in order to do work, a force has to be the cause of an object moving from its original position, if you understand. So work is force times displacement. A lot of times I know we hear that work is force times distance. You might have heard that a lot of times, but in physics, it's very definite. It is work is force times displacement. And it's very important. But we'll get into that later on in our further in our course when we do a deep dive into force. But for right now, just understand that work is force times displacement. So moving on, before we go any further, we have to deal with the fundamental measurements in physics. And so the fundamental measurement in physics are mass, length, and time. So we use these fundamental measurements to measure, describe, or quantify other quantities. And so these measurements cannot be broken down any further. So if you wanted to describe an object in space-time or space and time, you would use these measurements or these quantities to describe it. So first we have mass, which is defined as the amount of matter in an object, and the units that it's measured in are kilograms. And so in physics, we use the International System of Measurements, or SI units, and the unit that we use to measure mass is the kilogram. And so length, which is defined as the measurement or extent of something from end to end, is measured in meters, and time, which is the measured or measurable period during which an action, process, or condition exists or continues, is measured in seconds. So fundamentally, when we want to describe or measure an object, the most basic units that you can use are mass, length, and time. And so now we're going to recap what we've learned so far about these concepts. So now what we're doing is we're getting to the physics. We're getting into the physics of it all, because as one of my favorite physics professor said, he said, unless you add the units, you're not doing physics. You're doing math. Because the mathematics describes the relationships, it describes the amount, but the units describe the amount of what. So we have to finish describing what exactly are we measuring. So we're going to break down these quantities into their most basic units so you can see the relationship. So force is mass times acceleration, but when we break it down to its fundamental units, we can see that force, which is mass times acceleration, is broken down in the units of kilograms times meters divided by seconds squared. Or we can say that force is mass times length divided by time squared. Because I'm just dealing with the fundamental measurements. What are we actually measuring? And so we're measuring mass, length, and time. And so when we go to work, we see that work is equal to force times distance. So when we break it down into its units, we can see that force is kilograms times meter squared divided by second squared. Or we can say that work is mass times length squared divided by time squared, if you follow. And so in the same thing as with power, power is equal to work divided by time. And so in its units is kilograms times meter squared divided by seconds cubed. Or power is equal to is equal to mass times length squared divided by time cubed. So even though force, work, and power are different things, they all can be described using these fundamental units, these basic units, these most fundamental measurements of the universe, which are mass, length, and time. So what we've learned so far is that force is a push or pull on an object caused by its interaction with another object, and when that force is applied to an object and causes that object to be displaced from its original position, that force is said to have done work. And when work is done over a period of time, it produces power. And that work, force, and power can all be described, explained, and measured using the same fundamental physical qualities. So now that we understand conceptually force, power, and work and its fundamental units, now we're going to try to correlate those to a more abstract realm. And so what I've done is that I've made a correlation between those fundamental units of the universe that describe force, power, and work, and I've applied that to these concepts. So first I have mass, and I equate mass to available resources. So going back to what the messenger said in the message to the black man, he said that in that scenario, the available resource that he was dealing with was knowledge. But available resources can be anything. Just as mass is the amount of matter in an object, and matter is the stuff that makes up the universe, your available resources are the things that make you you. So your available resources could be knowledge, it could be patience, it could be faith, or it could be more physical things as money, health, anything that makes you you. Those are your available resources. And so in the fundamental quantity of universe as length, I equate that to a goal. And just as length is used to describe the distance from one end of a thing to another, from one position to another, your goal is like wherever you are. A goal is something that you haven't accomplished but want to accomplish. So you're not there yet. So there's a distance between where you are and where you want to be. So I equate that to length. And for time is still the same concept. It's a period, it's a duration. And so for this, I put time in the physics realm as a time frame in which all of these things are done within. And so just as you can define force and power in physics with mass, length, and time, you can define force and power as a human being trying to become a god with available resources, your goals, and your time frames. And so what the applications of this can be seen in many different ways. And one of the applications of this is that you have the power law of human performance. And so the power law of human performance states that the time it takes an individual to perform a given simple task decreases as the number of times the individual practice the task increase. And so what that simply says is that the more times you practice a thing, the less time it takes you to accomplish it. So what it's saying is that the more you practice at a thing, the more proficient you become at it. So the more you practice playing a violin, the more proficient you become at playing the violin. The more you practice painting. It could be painting. The more proficient you come at it, the more you practice at anything, the same principle applies, the more proficient you become at it. And so the power law of human performance has a mathematical formula, but for the sake of this class, we're not going to get down into it. But when you make a graph of the time it takes to perform the task versus the number of times you've practiced it, you'll see that it makes a curve where it tapers off to where you eventually get to a point where it takes no time at all. It takes no limit of time to do what it is that you're trying to do. And so that is a manifestation of your power. And especially when you're talking about your God force and power, which comes from that possessing that knowledge of God to increase your God power. So if power is work over time, and the faster you get work done, the more power you possess. When you're talking about spiritually, the faster that you can get your spiritual work done, the more powerful you are. The faster that you can cause an object to be displaced, that object can be you personally, the faster that you can cause yourself to be from point A to point B, the more powerful you are. And it's the same thing when you're interacting with other objects, or in this case, other people. The faster that you can cause someone else to change from A to B, the more powerful you are. And so we gain this power by being possessors of the knowledge of God. And the more we practice, the more we are proficient at the use of this knowledge, which really can only come by submission to the will of Allah, the faster it is that we can change ourselves and become more like Allah. And so with this short physics lesson, I want you to have the main takeaways from this is that the more you improve yourself, the faster you will accomplish your goals. The more available resources that you have, the more knowledge, the more patience, the more faith, the faster you will see a change in yourself. And even sometimes the faster you'll see the change in other people. And also, the faster you accomplish your goals, the more God power you possess. Because as in, the work over time, the more work you can do on yourself in the least amount of time, the more power you possess. If, where it took for you to drop a bad habit and pick up a good habit was 21 days, you manifested the power to change yourself. But if you can make a change, that same change in 10 days, you're more powerful than you were if you can make that change in 21 days. And so also, lastly, is that you can be a God if you put in the time and effort. Just like the power law of human performance states, if you practice submission enough times, the easier it'll become, the more proficient you'll be at it, and the faster you will see that change within yourself. And so, leaving off that Allah came in the person of Master Prophet Muhammad, he came 9,000 miles by himself, not to just make us intellectuals or, nice people, businessmen and women, but he actually came to make us God, because he came possessing the knowledge of God, and he came with the intent of sharing that knowledge with us in hopes of making us gods, just like he's a God. And so, leaving off with a quote from the Bible, or from Psalms 82 and 6, it says, "I have said, you are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High." So if we know that we are children of God, just as children are reflections of their parents, we are a reflection of our Father, the Most High, we will start to act like it. And so knowing that we are gods are the first step, or possessing that, Knowledge of God is the first step, and then it'll cause us to change. It'll be that force. That knowledge will be that force, that push or pull that begins us on our journey to change and ultimately be pushed towards becoming a God ourselves. So thank you for your attention in this brief physics lesson, and assalamu alaikum.